if you want to say your name and then your part in the war, and then you can either begin talking then or we can ask some questions.
All right.
And also give us your date of birth and place of birth.
Okay. All right.
Okay?
Okay. If I leave out something, ask me.
Okay.
Yeah. Ready?
We're ready.
Okay. I'm George B. Hightower, born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1911 on Hightower Road, which is in southwest Atlanta, when it was country. It was a farm at that time. My father was in the wooden box manufacturing business with a plant here and in Birmingham, farming, so he convinced my mother that he'd build a house out there on the farm if she would live there, which she said she would. So I lived there with the family until about 1911. Excuse me, 1921. I was 11 years old. And we moved to town because my sister was beginning to, at the age where she wanted to go to school, and mother wanted to go to seminary, so we moved in town, and that's where she went. Anyway, I went to the public schools in West End, Lee Street, and People Street until we moved to the north side, and I went to Spring Street, and after that, I went to Fulton High School, where I graduated. I went to VMI and graduated there in electrical engineering with a BS degree. And then I tried to find a job, and I couldn't find it too well, so I went back to Tech and took some graduate work there, mostly business courses, for up until from September until about January. And then I finally got a job with the W.D. Alexander Company selling air conditioning on a commission basis. And so I gave up my schooling and went to work. I made $375 the first year selling air conditioning. Well, anyway, that's sort of the beginning of my life. I ended up going to another company in Birmingham as chief engineer. You want all this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I went to Birmingham as chief engineer of a new company starting over there, air conditioning and heating. And they were given $10,000 by the dad to run the business, and they were sort of playboys, and they didn't last too long. I did the best thing I could to keep that thing going, but money ran out, and the old man says, no more money. So at the end of a year and a half, they folded. Then I went with a firm in Washington, D.C., and they were doing air conditioning all up and down the Atlantic coast, taking big jobs that the dealers couldn't handle, either design or install. So I went with them, and I did 4 jobs. One was in Utica, New York, one was in Montgomery, Alabama, and one was in Nashville, Tennessee, and one in Panama City, Florida, all at the same time in 1 year, and had a great time. But it was a lot of traveling. So, meantime, I'd been trying to get with the General Electric Company since the beginning, really, because I wanted their training. And I got a job with them to write the engineering data book that they were putting out on duct design and installation. So I went with them, and I spent a year getting the material together, all the reference material, and writing those 2 sections of their engineering manual. And then I stayed with them as a sales representative, and then I was an engineering representative. I was a service type representative in sales, and then they made me district manager of part of the Southeast division, or the region. And I had 5 states out of Birmingham, Alabama. And that was in about 39, I guess. I was there about a year and a half. Of course, then the war came along, and I came back to Atlanta, knowing that I was going to go in, which was only about a month or so before I got my orders. And then when the war came and we declared war, that was on December the 8th, I believe, and on December the 8th, I wrote a letter, said I'm ready for active duty. I'd like to be in the Air Corps, or the paratroopers, or the mechanized cavalry, or the mechanized cavalry, or the armored division. Got a letter back within 1 week. Says no vacancies available at this time. Within 2 days, I got orders to go to Wright Field, which I did. I reported in to a guy who was a major. He was from West Point, and he was the personnel director of the production division at Wright Field. And what they were doing, getting people from the capitals captains of industry to come and help get material to build airplanes. So we had some real high caliber people there. So anyway, he made me sit there all day, and finally he kept talking to me, and at the end of the day he says, "You're my assistant as personnel director of the production division." And I said, "Oh no." I said, I want combat. I want action." He says, "What do you think I want?" "I want it too, but I can't get it. I got this job, and that's it." And he says, "You're going to be here." And I said, "You mean there's no way to get out of it?" He says, "Not as long as I'm here, you're not going to get out." And I sat out, and I was his assistant for about a year, and then he was transferred and got combat duty, and that made me acting, and I finally became personnel director of the production division under General Wolfe. He was a major general in charge of that activity. And so I went through the same process with him, and I wanted to have combat, and he says, "I want it too, so you stay here until I get out." So the same story. So finally his orders came in about 6 months. So I was there about a year and a half when this happened. So I took his orders in, and I had mine right under it. I gave it to him, and he got up and sort of danced around the desk. He was so happy he didn't know what to do to get out and get a command in combat, see. So I let him dance around a couple of times, and I said, "General, you remember what you promised me?" And he looked at me. I said, "You said you were going to let me get out if you get out." "That's right, I did. Where's the order?" And I said, "Here it is right here." And he came over and signed it, and I was out in 3 days, see. And I went to Staff and Command School out in Fort Leavenworth, and it was about a 2-month course. In the meantime, I didn't know whether I was going to get overseas or not, and I had met my wife about a year before that. Our 2 friends married, Lawson Calhoun and Eleanor Clay, and so we were in that, both of us in the wedding. Well, 1 year later, we married. That was on June the 5th.
No.
Yeah.
Not to interrupt, but where was Wright Field?
That was in Dayton, Ohio.
In Dayton, Ohio?
Dayton, Ohio, yeah. And that's where I stayed that year and a half. So anyway, we married, and, these orders come through, and it was less than 3 weeks, about 2 weeks, I had to leave to go out to Staff and Command School, and wives could not go out there. So she stayed home, and I went out there. And 1 week before it was over, she drove out and picked me up, and I got out 1 week ahead of time before anybody else left, because my convoy going overseas was to the farm at Goldsboro, North Carolina, and go out through Norfolk. So she came up and picked me up, and we drove through Atlanta on up to Goldsboro, and I didn't see her for 27 months. That was our married life at that time. Anyway, so I left and went overseas, and I went first on a Liberty ship across the Atlantic and went through Gibraltar. And see, I thought I was going to England, because Wolfe had said, I'm gonna have. He told me, so I'm gonna have you with me when I get this thing going. Well, I knew that they were probably going to Europe. So I thought, this is it. See? So when we went through Gibraltar, I knew it wasn't England, and it wasn't with him. So we went inside the Mediterranean and went to Oran, North Africa, and they unloaded our convoy and used it for an invasion of Sicily, I think it was, and left us there. And they said, "You're here indefinitely until we get another convoy to bring back, and then we'll take you on to somewhere." They didn't even tell us where. I still didn't know where I was going, see. So anyway, I ran into a good friend of mine here from Atlanta who is a doctor in the Emory unit, and he says, "We got things lined up to go out gazelle hunting on the desert. Can you go?" And I figured, well, let's see, how long will it take you to get back? And he says, "One day, if we get word that we have to." So we went gazelle hunting in the desert and got about 8 gazelle.
You remember his name?
Charlie Stone, Dr. Charlie Stone. He was my VMI roommate, as a matter of fact.
Really?
Yeah, for 1 year. And then he left to take medicine, and I stayed there. And the other roommates were J.P. Allen, who's the son of the J.P. Allen clothing store here, and the other one was Sherrod Kennedy, whose father was vice president of the First National Bank. None of them came back, so I was about alone, and I went with 3 other boys from Virginia, 2 from Hampton, Virginia, and 1 from Leesburg, and we graduated together. So anyway, I stayed there and graduated, and when I got out, then I started this procedure I just told you about. But now on the convoy, it went through and we landed at Oran. We went on that gazelle hunt, and it still was. We were there about 3 weeks before they gave us a convoy to get out. And so we got on this convoy, which was an English convoy with ships that were manned by Indians from India. And the English, the officers were in charge of it, both the Navy and the troops that were on board the ship. And then we went across the Mediterranean with, there were something like 23 ships in the convoy. Now, they were not all American passengers or troops, but there were other mix, but we were the major part of them. And we left on the day before Thanksgiving. On Thanksgiving Day, we were attacked by 2 German squadrons out of France, and they came from the rear. So this was in what they call a tight squeeze of the Mediterranean between the tip of Italy and the little protrusion point of Africa at the end of, I forgot what, Algiers or something like that. But anyway, it was a small place there, and we were going through it with our convoy. And they attacked us late in the afternoon. They probably hit us the first time at around 4:45, 5 o'clock. And for the first time, they used a new bomb called a radio-controlled, remotely controlled bomb. It was really a guided missile is what it was, and they had a little joystick in the plane, and they had 1 or 2 on each plane. They also had some regular bombs in some of the squadron planes, and they dropped those. They had planes, fighter planes who were strafing, and then the first one of these guided bombs that I saw a puff underneath of a plane, and this bomb left it with a little puff behind it. And then I lost sight of it. I was manning a lifeboat on the top of the ship called the El Banforo, which was one of those ships. The ship ahead of us and to the left was called the Rohna, R-O-H-N-A, and they had a lot of troops aboard too. In fact, 2,200 troops, and ours didn't probably have more than about 1,000. So anyway, this thing starts coming down, and the next thing I know, I see what I thought was a fighter plane coming from the rear of the ship. And I said to the guy on the boat with me, the lifeboat with me, if he didn't pull up, he's going to hit the stack. He missed the stack about a foot. Now, he didn't, the bomb did. And it turned out to be one of those bombs that I saw dropping.
Right.
And it had a little jet behind it, had 2 wings, and the ailerons at the back. It looked just like a little fighter plane, and I was sure that's what it was until it passed. Went in the water right off the bow of the ship and blew up, put shrapnel all over the ship. And I think some people got, a little bit with this things falling, but no major damage at all to the ship or personnel. But that's the time I realized somebody's trying to kill me, see. That's when I really knew I was in the war. Then about 10 minutes later, one of those same things came in the side of the Rohna, which I said was ahead of us and to the left. And he came in the side and blew the whole middle of the ship out. I mean, it just blew it out. Well, there were 2,200 aboard that ship. There were 1,155 of them that were killed or drowned that night. And the rest of them, and when it came by us, it was rolled over at about a 45-degree angle, and this water was just full of blood and dead soldiers, plus those who were swimming and trying to live. And they had signed 3 support ships to help pick them up. But the convoy goes on. It never stops. So these people all around our ship, dead, alive, and everything else swimming. And then we passed, and before we got out of sight, that ship sunk. Within an hour, it went down. And it was a horrible sight, I'll tell you. I'll tell you a little sidelight to that. After it was over, I was so thankful to be alive, I didn't know what to do. And we all were really, because it was just that close. 1 foot hit the stack and we'd been gone. I was below that by 15 feet, that's all. So anyway, I remembered I had bought a whole box of Hershey bars, almond Hershey bars, before I left, and it was down there in my bag. And I realized also that it had no value. Now I was alive. I get emotional about this. Anyway, I ran down, before we got all clear, and I got the whole box of Hershey bars that were unopened, brought it back up, and I gathered everybody around the boat, and I said, now boys, we're going to have a silent prayer for hoping that these boys that are still alive will be able to be picked up and give the blessing to those that we saw dead in the water. So I said, that's the first thing we're going to say a prayer about. So I gave them time to say it. And I said, now, I want to say a prayer of thanks, the fact that we're still alive and they're not. So you say this prayer, which there was silence. And then I said, now we're going to celebrate. I've got a box of Hershey bars here, and I'm telling you, I want you to take your share of it, pass it out to everybody on the top deck, and let's celebrate that we are alive. And I said, we thank God that we are. So we passed out that whole box of Hershey bars. And I tell you, it meant nothing. It had no value at all. So anyway.
Now, had you already been assigned to a unit at this point?
No, I'm a casual shipment.
Okay.
Now, I was in charge of all the enlisted personnel on that particular shipment. I had just been assigned as the, having come from personnel, they thought that's what I should be, see, so I was assigned. I couldn't get away from this title of personnel, see, and I'm an engineer, all this background from VMI, but I was a personnel officer. So, anyway.
Let's haul ready.
Before we go any further on this trip, when I'm on my way to somewhere I didn't know where it was, I'd like to go back when, Pearl Harbor came. That day I was on a deer hunt over beyond Augusta in South Carolina, and there was a group of us that every year we went deer hunting somewhere, and this year it was over there in South Carolina in a swampy area. And when Pearl Harbor came on Sunday, we were hunting, and so that night we were coming back to Augusta, and we went into this restaurant to get a cup of coffee and something. And everybody seemed to be excited about things, and we finally, said, what's going on here? And then they told us about Pearl Harbor. So with that, we were really excited then, and most of us had been sleeping up until then, because we'd been up, playing poker at night and hunting during the day. But I tell you, we drove all the way from Augusta to Atlanta, and nobody slept a wink. We were excited, I'll tell you that, and came back to Atlanta. And then our families were sort of upset too. And but particularly, let's see, my wife at that, I was married then. No, I wasn't either. No, I wasn't married then. And in fact, I didn't even know my wife then. I met her between that time and the time that I, went in the service. And then that next June, that's when our friends married. And then that's when I had met her a little bit before that, but we were in the wedding together. And that's when we had 5 dates between the time I went in the service and got to Wright Field and the time we married. 5 dates. Commuting from Dayton, Ohio down here on whoever had a plane that would come through Atlanta on Friday or Saturday after hours, and I had to go back Sunday. So it was 5 days and we married, see. And let's see, I think you want to know what the family reaction was to this. Well, of course, I was in the reserve, having been graduated in VMI as a second lieutenant. And I had done some correspondence work, but I was still a second lieutenant. And so I knew that I was going to go in, so I volunteered immediately. I wanted to get a position that I wanted, which was, as I explained to you, was either Air Corps or these other 4 places. And I didn't get any of them except the Air Corps, but not as a pilot. I was too old. I was 32 years old, and 28 is the limit, so I couldn't get flight training. So I went in just as an Air Corps administrative officer is what it was. But anyway, it turned out all right at the end. But that's the way it was. Everybody was either called in or volunteered. Most of the people like myself, they volunteered immediately. And a lot of them who did not have a commission, they did the same thing. They wrote somebody that could get a commission or something to get in. and many of them did. Some went in the Navy, some went in the Marines, some went. My brother-in-law, he was a graduate of Culver, so he had military training, and the Marines took him, and he ended up to be a major in the Marines at the war was over, and he fought in the Pacific through a lot of the invasions and lived through it. And I had a younger brother who went to VMI after me, and he went into like me, and he was in the artillery at VMI, and they put him in the artillery, and he fought in France, and he was finally assigned to Patton's outfit and went into the Battle of the Bulge and all that area, see, and he lived through it, and he wasn't injured, but he was right in the middle of it in the Battle of the Bulge and got through it. But he had orders to come to the Pacific at that time, you know, when we were still fighting in China and the Pacific. So he had orders to go over in the Pacific. So he was so glad before he got there that to drop the bomb, he didn't have to go. And I'll tell you later why I was mighty glad too, because I would have been the first ones out of China into Japan. And I'll tell you for sure, I would not have lived through it, because people don't realize how fanatical the Japs were. Now, they may be different now, but I'm not too sure of it. But I am convinced that I would never made it. I don't believe I'd made it, because it would have been rough. The natives would have been they'd been using bamboo spears if they didn't have any ammunition, and that would have been rough at every place you went. So, anyway, I'm just glad that we didn't have an invasion. All right, anything else about the background you'd like to have me put in here before I go on with the overseas assignment?
I think we'll just pick back up. You were en route to a place you didn't know where.
Yeah, I sure didn't know where. And incidentally, just before we left Oran, there were 3 or 4 of us. One of them was a pilot. And we went back to Algiers from Oran, over to Algiers, and that's the town of Algiers in Algeria, to find out if we could find somebody that we knew that would tell us where we were going. Well, the only thing we finally found out was that the boat was heading for Bombay. And of course, we were getting on another convoy, and we didn't know whether it was the same or not, but they said, we think that's where you're going to end up, in Bombay, India. Well, at least we knew where we were going. So we flew back to Oran, and sure enough, our convoy came, and we got on it, and then we had this experience on Thanksgiving Day in the tight squeeze of the Mediterranean when we almost got sunk too. But anyway, the convoy goes on, and incidentally, in that convoy, they sunk this ship. They hit a British destroyer, but did not sink it, and they hit a minesweeper. And it damaged both of them, but it did not sink them. They had to turn back and go to port, but they didn't hit any other transport ships. We were the nearest one to be hit after that.
And you said you were on a British transport?
Yeah, British.
The crew was British, and
yeah, it was. Well, actually, no.
The officers were British, and
yeah,
it was a
Indian crew.
Okay.
Now, this was a cruise type ship during peacetime. You know, we'd take cruises through the Mediterranean, this kind of thing, tourist type ship. So it was fancy. I'll give you this story because we were amazed. You know, the British have funny customs, and it's in some cases very ludicrous the way they do things. Well, anyway, here we are on this ship now, a cruise ship in peacetime, and we're officers. And now we ate up in the mess hall. And when we were served breakfast, first, I'm going to get up. In the morning, I was awakened by a steward, I think you'd call him, on the ship, with, "Sir, would you like to have your coffee now?" And here's a hot cup of coffee. You're in bed, and he wakes you up, "Would you like to have coffee right now?" I'm in the Army. I didn't ever expect this. But I'm on a British ship, and they're doing it just like it's peacetime. And I had my coffee, and we dressed, and we went down to breakfast. And it was at a table, it was a long table, and they had all of the things you'd have in the driving club. Here's a mat, and you'd have 2 or 3 spoons over here, a knife and a fork, maybe 2 forks, and you'd have a water glass, and you'd have a cup for your tea. It was tea more than coffee. And then maybe that time you didn't have wine. But anyway, here it is, set up just like at the driving club now. And we're in the middle of combat in the Mediterranean Sea, see? And there was a waiter behind every 4 or 5 seats, and they were serving us. Now, outside this, looking through a glass like that, right in front of you, you're all enlisted men. They ate out of the canteen, mess kit, and canteen water, and then, but it was served down in their hold in the ship, which could have been, way down. And they were served in the canteen just a meager amount, and only 2 meals a day. And we had breakfast, we had tea and crumpets at 10, we had lunch at 12:30, we had tea and crumpets at 3 in the afternoon, we had dinner at around 5, and we had tea and crumpets again about 9 at night. And if you needed something before you went to sleep, you went down to the boardroom, and there was more there then. Now, as for officers, the enlisted men got 2 meals a day. So we're going along, and I think it was about the 3rd day out, my master sergeant with my troops came in front of me. Here I'm eating with all that stuff, and in front of me we were getting a full meal. It just wasn't just a GI meal. It was a full meal served just like the British do. I looked out the window, and my my sergeant major was holding his mess kit like that at an angle, and there was one little piece of meat like that, and there was one hardtack piece of bread, and there was one other thing in there. What it was, little beans, maybe about a half a dozen beans. That was his 1 meal a day, see? And he's just standing there, looking right at me, see? So I figured I better get up and find out what's this all about. So I went out, came around, and met him. He said, "Sir, we're about to have a mutiny downstairs, and you got to do something." I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" He said, "Sir, I want you to know that was our lunch, and our first meal of the day, and the second meal will be not very different from this. And you can wait and see if you want to, but I'm telling you, our men are sitting down there now. They want you to come down and look to see." I said, "Lead off." So we went down in the hole, and sure enough, not a man had touched his food, and they were on these tables, which they slept on and they ate on, and then there were hammocks above that. But they were all sitting around this table, all over this deck in that room, in that hole, and every one of them hadn't touched it, and it was the same thing he had. I said, "You're right, I agree with you, let's go see the captain." So I marched back up, and I tried to get on the bridge of the ship, and first mate came down and says, "Stop." I said, "I want to see the captain." He says, "You can't come up here. You go to your commanding officer, and he can talk to the captain if the captain wants to talk to him. But you're not coming up here." And I said, "Yes, sir." So I went back, and he was in the mess hall eating with me, see. I said, "Captain," he was a colonel. I said, "Colonel, you come out here, I want to show you something." So I showed him this, and I said, "We got to see the captain. We're about to have a mutiny downstairs. They haven't touched their food, and they're waiting for us to tell them something." And so he said, "Okay, I'll go." So he went on, and I was going to go up with him. He stopped me. The first mate did. He says, just the colonel. That's the only one that can come up here." So he went up there and explained to him that this was a British ration for soldiers, and that was all they could give them because they had British aboard. They were at the same mess. All the crew of the ship was getting that same food. That was all they were going to serve. That's all they had. So anyway, the colonel says, "Well, do we have any food aboard this ship?" He says, "Yes, you have it below the boards in every hole. There's some food." In fact, he says, "That's a major thing we carry other than troops is food." He says, "Can we get it?" He says, "You're the commanding officer. You can get it if you tell me." I said, "My orders say take it to Bombay, and that's where I'm taking it. So that's where it's going to go unless somebody counteracts that order." So he said, "All right, I will do that, and we'll control it. So we take it out and provide the mess with whatever we need to feed our troops and yours." And what he said, "Now, if you get in, you supplement, you got to supplement mine too." So we did. We opened it up and started doing that, and went down and told enlisted men that, and boy, there was a big yell and howl, and they sat there and ate their food. But that night, they had almost the same as we had out of the stores in the ship. And we fed them all the way across. But we were pretty close to a mutiny, I'll tell you that, because they were really upset. But anyway, we went on, and we ended at Bombay. Well, they unloaded us there, and we didn't know where we were going to go. And we went out, there were a few of us together, and that I'd been with on the ship, and we went out and had dinner. Well, I'd been warned about what's the food, but, you know, I went in a nice restaurant right downtown. I thought, all right. So I just ate whatever they gave me, see. Well, that night, I was sick as a dog. I'd gotten the GIs, dysentery. So the next day, we had orders to get on a train and go to Karachi, which was about a couple of 300 miles north of there in India. Got aboard, and I got all my men there. And then the mail came that, you know, it was en route the whole time we were crossing. Now, this is almost about 2 months now that we were getting here, no mail. So they distributed the mail again, and looking for somebody who was in charge of these group. And he was a major, and nobody else wanted to touch it, see. So I said, I'm in charge of the troops. What do you got? And he said, I got the mail, 3 months, or 2 months, and I want to distribute it to somebody that can distribute it to your men. I said, let me have it. And I'm sick as hell, see. And I finally got one of my sergeants with me, and I said, now, here's the mail. Let's get it going. So we went up and down the train and just put the mail out. I mean, I didn't know where they were or what, but we put it out so they could at least go through and find it. And before that train left, there was mail in every car in that convoy. So anyway, they had mail. And then it took them probably 2 or 3 days to get it all squared away, whose mail was what. But anyway, so we had a good time reading mail the first 2 or 3 days, and then we had Christmas Day after that, halfway to Karachi. And the radio said, all the troops overseas are going to get turkey today with all the dressings. So we stopped at this Indian stinking station with all the little riffraff all around the place trying to ask for food or money or something. And they fed us pork and beans for Christmas dinner. And that was our Christmas on the side of this railroad track. And then we went on into Karachi and stayed there about 2 weeks, I guess. They processed us, and then they told us where we were going to go. Some were going to Burma, some were going to India, some were in China, and I was going to China. That's all I knew, just going to China. So they put me on a plane, and I flew to Delhi, New Delhi, and then over to Assam Valley, which is a place you take off to go over the hump. The hump is the Himalayas, a line of mountains that are high. They go up to about 27,000 feet. So anyway, we got aboard a C-47 with the baggage down the middle, strapped down, and we were in bucket seats on each side. And we took off and started over the hump. And we got about halfway, and we were up at about 12,000 feet, which is all right. Oxygen's a little light at that time, but you know, it didn't bother us. And then we looked out the window. Somebody saw it, and I saw it too. There were 2 Jap planes coming this way, down below us, and we up here. And so, boy, everybody started hollering, Jap planes to the right, to the left. Jap planes. And so the pilot heard it, and he looked, he saw it. He just turned right like this and went up into the clouds to get in the clouds, because a fighter can't fly in the clouds. So he got in the clouds, and these Japs turned immediately. Well, they saw us at the same time and started coming behind us. But we got in the clouds before they got to us. And we stayed up there in those clouds until we got over Kunming, and then came down and landed. And the Japs, of course, by that time gave up on us because they had to go home. And we landed. When we landed, there were about 7 of the people along with me on that ship that just passed out because 18,000 feet where they went to, you know, there's no oxygen to mount anything. And I was weak as I could be, and I felt like I was going to, if I had to do it much longer, I would have passed out too. But 7 of them did. But they had oxygen masks waiting for us when we came down and threw it on anybody that was out. And we got off the ship and got to Kunming. So,
now let me interject real quickly. What month and year was this?
Well, this is in December of 1943.
Okay.
1943. See, I had left in about September,
Okay.
August really, the end of August, and this is now December. See, I'm in and out all this time. So I arrived there, and I got some dates I can give you later. It's in my diary here. And so we went over, and I actually ended up in China on January the 8th at the 14th Air Force headquarters for the interview to see what they're going to do with me. But that was January the 8th that I actually landed in Kunming. I had to go to Ling Ling first. The weather was bad, and then we came back to Kunming. But anyway, I was interviewed by Chennault and Casey Vincent, who was there at the time. He was the CO of the 68th Composite Wing, and the young fellow that I told you from West Point, real fine guy, later was the youngest BG since the Civil War. He was 29 years old when we pinned the bars on him, about 12 months later. So anyway, he interviewed me, and said he wanted me to be in his headquarters as adjutant in A1, personnel again, see. I said, are you sure there's no other position? He says, that's what we want you to be. A1, that's personnel, and adjutant is personnel or administration. He said, you just finished staff and command school, and we need somebody, we're just setting up this wing headquarters. We need somebody like you to set it up and get it going and tell us how to handle it. So I said, yes, sir, whatever you say. So anyway, I got on a plane and I went to Kualin. Now that was, well, it was about the 9th, I guess, of January, and checked in, and so he made me A1, an adjutant of the wing, issued orders to that effect, and I took over. And of course, people began to come in. Some of them were already there, enlisted men and some of the officers. So we set it up and, on the basis of the regulations, so that it was operated as a personnel office, and the adjutant's office was the same thing. So anyway, Casey was a young fellow, but he was smart, and I immediately just was attached to him, and I just liked him. And we had a little confrontation a couple of days later, I'll tell you about it. But anyway, he was very efficient. And I was assigned to this, and we had a mess where the officers, it was all the same building, but the officers had their table and enlisted men had theirs, see. And so I guess it was about a couple of weeks later, they had a habit of once a month when there was no moonlight to go in town and have a sort of a banquet to get away from the Chinese rice and whatever it was we got that to miss. Because see, we finished the planes, the pilots, the mechanics, and anything to fly those planes, intelligence, navigation, all that. But the Chinese finished all the troops necessary to protect us. They protected our bases, they protected our headquarters, and they also provided the troops to keep the Japs from coming to us. They tried to. Mm-hmm. But they did all the ground troops, and they built our buildings, they built our runways under our supervision, and they ran our messes, provided the food and all the other stuff. How's my time?
Oh, you're doing fine.
Okay. Anyway, we were going to go downtown that night. It was a Saturday night. And so somebody came by and says, we're meeting down at the general's place. No, we're meeting in the room at the end of this building, which is, we call them hostels. So I got dressed and went down there, and I just, opened the door, walked in. And Casey looked at me and he says, do you know how to enter your superior officer's quarters? And I said, yes, sir. He says, suppose you do it. I turned around, went out and knocked on the door and said, Major Hightower would like to come in your room, sir. He says, come in. When I walked in, he says, have a drink. That was it. That's the only time I had a real time with him about anything, see. But I didn't know it was his room. I knew what to do with the general's room, the colonel's room, but I didn't know it was his room, see. So anyway, he forgot about it, and I did too. And that was the only time I ever had any rubbing the wrong way with Casey Vincent. And he always gave me excellent on my efficiency rating, and he's the one that put me in for the Legion of Merit before he left. So we had a good relationship that whole time. And I considered him a great commanding officer because he was young, but he was beyond his years, really. So there I am at wing headquarters. Now, he also made me base defense officer, which meant that when we had raids, at that time we were beginning to get superiority over the Japs in the air. And so they didn't come over in the daytime very much. They usually came at night, a lot of nights, really. If we were running a lot of missions, they came over a lot. And it would hit us with 1 up to 6 planes during the night, just spread them out, keep you up all night, where you have to get out and get in a slit trench or a cave. So this going on, as base defense officer, I had to, get the troops out there and man what we call anti-aircraft guns, which were, now we didn't have anti-aircraft guns as such. We had guns, 50 caliber machine guns that were taken out of wrecked planes and put them on a bamboo pole, and then I would be out there firing, and there'd be an enlisted man with me to keep the bullets going through the machine gun. But that was our anti-aircraft firing because we had no other things to work with. So anyway, as they came over on the raids, I'd try to shoot them. I don't know that I would hit one. I think I had some close calls, but I don't know. I never shot one down, I'll tell you. But I kept trying to keep them from coming down strafing and bombing at a low level where they could be more accurate.
Now, what type of planes were there at this base?
That's
American planes.
We had P-40s. We had one squadron of B-25s, that's a medium bomber, and that's it. We had 2 squadrons of P-40s, fighters, and 1 of B-25s that time. Now, later on, before we left there, we got 1 squadron of photo recon, which is a P-38. That's photo recon to take pictures. And then we did get 1 squadron of B-24s, which is heavy bombers. That was before that 9 months was up. But when I got there, that's all we had was 2 squadrons of P-40s and 1 squadron of B-25s.
Yeah.
Now, there was another base there.
Okay.
We were on Yangtong and another fighter strip, and that was right next to us, parallel. And there was another base at Krelian, about probably 10 miles away, on the other side of town. There was a 68 composite wing. It was the Chinese-American, excuse me, we were the 68, they were the Chinese-American composite wing. Now, they had the same thing we did at that time. They had P-40s and B-24s, 25s. But they operated as a unit of half and half. They were half Chinese and half American.
Wow. Every
Every job had 2 people, American, and they were operating there at different targets than we were, but out of the same base.
Now, as the adjutant and the person in charge of personnel, what, on a day-to-day basis, were your responsibilities?
All right, as adjutant, I issued all the orders. In other words, if a man was promoted, if he was assigned, or if he was given an honor, citation, I did all the paperwork involved, the orders and citations and all that. And if it came down from, say, Chennault to us, I would take that order and then interpret it like it would say, by order of Chennault. By, and it would be that time Colonel Vincent, and I would sign it as adjutant. I would issue the order, I would sign it, and I would just use Chennault's name because we had an order that said this is it. We picked it up, carried it on, if it was to be carried on, but Vincent would sign it and I would sign it,
Okay.
and then it would be issued to the men. Now then, I was responsible for keeping all their records, all their personnel records. And any administrative things, like an order to a squadron to go on a mission, to do a certain thing. The written copy was my responsibility to see that it was properly stored and kept. So administratively, it was me. I did everything that had to do with administration of that headquarters and all the squadrons under me. And now, as far as the A1, that was a staff position. See, the staff was A1, A2, A3, A4. That was personnel was 1, and intelligence was 2, 3 was operations, flights, that kind of stuff, and 4 was supply. So those were the thing. Now, normally that base defense should have been under A4, but the general apparently didn't have enough confidence in the A4 to give it to him. He said, "You know how to do it, you do it." See, I said, "Sir, if you say so, I'll do it." And I did. I was the base defense officer along with it.
And there, I know when you were assigned to the 14th Air Force, or to the Flying Tigers, had you heard of that unit? Had their fame, had it been known in the state at this point?
Well, to answer that, I've got to give you a difference. There were three Flying Tiger groups in China. The first one was the AVG, American Volunteer Group. They were soldiers of fortune that volunteered from the Marines, the Navy, Army, Air Corps. And they were volunteers now, just like any other soldier of fortune decided they were going to go to fight. So they volunteered and were sent over as merchants, as car salesmen, preachers, missionaries, or whatever they were, but nothing had to do with the Army or the Air Force. And they went over over a period of between September and about October. They were shipped over. And then Chennault had to train them. These were bomber pilots, they were Navy aircraft carrier pilots, and they were some fighter pilots, but most of them were bomber pilots, had training in that. And so Chennault had to teach them his way, and he had a special way of treating. He did not believe in dogfighting. You know, that's where you do like this with each other, and you find that was World War I was all dogfighting, and they've been taught that ever since. Chennault didn't believe in that, and he believed in having an alarm system where you know when your enemy's coming in, and you get up ahead of time and you're ready for them. Well, he even wrote a book on this, and that's the reason why he finally resigned and went over to China, because they weren't paying attention to him, did not realize the value of fighters. They didn't think that a bomber needed a fighter to protect it. But once they got in Europe and started running over Germany, they found it right quick. They were losing all the bombers because the guns on the bombers could not keep the the Germans away until it was too late. They would be shot out of the air, and that's what happened. So then they built a P-51, which was a long-range fighter, to do that. All right, now getting back to the flights. That was the AVG. They were volunteers. And they had the best record of anybody in the time. But their first battle was in December of 41. Yeah, it was 41. And then they flew combat missions until July the 4th of 42. All right, in 42, they were disbanded because, see, they were volunteers, and in the meantime, we'd gotten in the war, had our own Air Corps, and they wanted these guys to join the U.S. Air Corps. Well, they were volunteers, and they didn't have to. Well, there was a big disagreement because they said, if you give us leave and go home, we'll join. They said, no, you're going to stay here. We can't afford to lose you. Well, the time was up. They said, be disbanded on July the 4th, and they said, we're going home. And they wouldn't give them transportation, anything, and said, you've got to stay here. And every one of them except 7 left. And 7 of them left. They stayed there because of Chennault. They wasn't going to leave him until he had somebody to take his place. So when the first men came in, they took them on missions to show them how to operate for about 2 weeks, almost 3. And then they went home. But they went on missions, and one of them was lost during that period on a combat mission. But they stayed long enough to do it, and some of the enlisted men did the same thing. But there was a lot of controversy because of a general in India who was over Chennault. And it was a sad situation, really, because these men wanted to stay with Chennault, but they were not going to do this without leave. So anyway, they were disbanded on July 4th, 42. All right, then they formed the China Air Task Force, and it was made up of those who stayed with the AVGs, both enlisted officers. They took the planes of that squadron, And then they had volunteers in India and in China who volunteered for this China Air Task Force. And it was just a skeleton type outfit, but at least they could fly planes and combat the Japs to keep them from bombing those bases and cities. And that lasted until March the 8th, 1943. Then they formed the 14th Air Force Flying Tigers. Now, see, Chennault's in charge of all of them. So that was the three organizations. I was in the 14th Air Force during that period, so I'm sure I was sent to the Staff Command School once I said I was going overseas to be prepared to go to China, because I got orders before the school even was out to go to Goldsboro and go overseas on that convoy I was on with a group going to China. So that was the reason why I was there, I'm sure. But I thought I was going to go with Wolf, but I wasn't. So I just wanted you to get clear that there's three different outlets.
That's good that you clarified that.
Yeah, because
so when you found out, you were going with Chennault, it was his. He's famous now.
Yeah, that's right.
By modern historians, but was he have that following?
See, I didn't know the whole story, but I had heard of Chennault and I'd heard of the Flying Tigers, because with the reputation they had of shooting down that 297 planes with a loss of about 12 personnel. That's ground and flight, and losing maybe 25 or 30 planes, that were shot down and they got out by parachute. I'd heard about that, see, but I didn't realize how effective it was when you got over there and you talked to boys that were there.
Right.
They had stayed over. And some of them went home and came back. Tex Hill was one. Ed Rector was another one, and Holiday was another one. There were about 4 or 5 of them, 6 of them came back, and they were all squadron commanders or group commanders when they came back, because they had experience to do it. So anyway, I knew when I got there who Chennault was.
Right.
And I was impressed when I first saw him there. He's a very strong face. If you see these pictures I've got here, it's a very strong, hard face. But he was gentle as he could be. Really, I just thought he was great. I say 2 things about him. He was the finest fighter tactician the Air Corps ever had. I believe that's very strongly what he did in China, with the AVGs and with the China Air Task Force and then with us. And the second thing I say about him is he was the best leader of men that I served on while I was in the service. And I believe that very strongly, and a lot of people with me felt the same way. And I have a real reason to say that, because I could have been court-martialed 3 times when I was behind the Jap lines, about there by myself and having to make decisions. And, when you make decisions, and sometimes you're right, and sometimes you're wrong, sometimes somebody thinks you're wrong. Mm-hmm. So only one of them was actually filed, but in each case, I had a wife from Chennault. What's the story on the barracks? And what's the story on the Chinese guards? And what's the story on the parachutes? Each time I'd wire back. The parachute deal, the charges had been preferred, because the guy told me, he said, I'm going to court-martial you for this. I said, you won't leave this base unless you do what I tell you to, and he finally did. After about 10 minutes of talking and putting the 45 in his belly practically and saying, you're not leaving this base. One of us not going to leave this base until you get those parachutes on the ground. I'll tell you a story later. But anyway, I did that. And he got that, and I never heard anything about any of these charges or possible charges, because he killed them. So I think he's a great guy. All right, any other questions?
I guess you wanted to just kind of tell us what you did day to day. I guess just kind of take the story from there.
All right, well, I'll go on from there. Now, we stayed...
I think Elizabeth may have a question.
Right,
I was going to ask if you had a routine. If you had a routine like when you were in Quayland, that'd be interesting to hear.
Well, it was pretty routine, and it was pretty steady, too. We got up in the morning, usually around 6, and we had a staff meeting at 6:30. and now the intelligence would give us a situation map. And a situation map is where they plot where they think the Japs are, or your enemy. In this case, it just looked like a bunch of lines coming down from where you were, and up here it's coming from down below where you're going. And when they begin to approach you, then you know you got to do different things about your squadrons. And of course, Casey Vincent would make the decision with the tactical officers of where we're going to hit today. This is where we think they are, and we'd send a plane up for reconnaissance and find out. That's the first thing, to be sure they're there. And then your flights go out, either bombers or fighters for that day. But that morning, the staff makes that decision, what we're going to do today. Then everybody does their part, like if it's personnel, it's my responsibility to get the personnel to the squadron who's going to do it. And if it's getting the orders out, we issue an order to that squadron to go to this target or alternate targets. And that went to them, and then they also issue their own orders. So it was an administrative process starting at that meeting at around 6:30 in the morning. And then as the morning went on, of course, we did our usual stuff of keeping the records and getting the orders out, and except new people coming in and the people who were transferred out and people that didn't come back on missions, we had to make, some kind of acknowledgement of that, report it to headquarters. See, it all came through my office as adjutant. And if somebody did not come back after the mission was over and it was past time, then we had to think about notifying families of what's happened to them, and the general would make a note of whatever it was. I'd write the letter or whatever it was to give it back to him and get it out. So that during the day, it was that kind of administrative work. Now, then we had lunch, which was at our mess hall, which all Chinese food, Chinese cooks, and it was just normal rice-based meal. Then in the afternoon, if there was no activity going on heavy, we might play volleyball or baseball or something late in the afternoon, around 4, 6 o'clock, just for dinner. Then we had dinner, and that night, this would be interesting to you, our entertainment, we'd had an ongoing, in the wing headquarters now, ongoing poker game. Now, only about 6 people can play, so whoever got there would play, and if somebody got up, you'd take their place. But there'd always be somebody around just looking, and they would get in if somebody was there. Well, this went on until, it was almost 9 months. But towards the end, when the Japs were getting right on us, the general one night, it was a round table, and we didn't have any money. We played on credit, and if you lost, you put your name in the book and so much that you owed for that night, and added to what you either owed or subtracted from what you didn't owe. And it was a daily record of how you were doing on the money in the poker game. And there were no chips, there were just pieces of paper we used for chips and that kind of stuff, and played cards. So at the end of the night, you'd write it down and go to bed, and that was around 11 o'clock. Well, this particular night, after we'd been playing all the time, and it was a friendly type game, nobody was upset, but the stakes kept going higher and higher and higher. Started out, about dime card, and that last night that this happened, I had bet $100 different times on 2 cards. $100. Now, good gosh, I wasn't making, but about $125 a month. We were gotten out of sight, see. And Casey Vincent began to realize this. So he just took this table and it was right at the end of the game, just like that, and dumped everything on the table, see. And he says, boys, this is the last poker game. It's going to be in this headquarters. We're thinking more about poker than we are killing those damn Japs. And he says, this is it. No more poker. Now, anybody wants to play from now to the end of the month, all right. But at the end of this month, we're going to pay up, and no more poker in this headquarters. You understand it? See? And everybody did. And I said, thank good Lord, it's over, because that night, and $200, good God. And it so happened that by that time, I was about $1,500 ahead for the whole period. But right now, this month, I was beginning to get in the hole because I lost and I was getting careless. But anyway, I was so glad I knew what to do. So I even had to borrow enough to pay off that night from my buddy, and I paid it off, and then, of course, that month I was able to pay him back. But I was so glad that that poker was over. I didn't know what to do. So that's a little sidelight on what happens in the headquarters. But side trips were that if we had something special to go out or find a body, that would be my problem, to go out and see if I could do it. Or if the ship went down, I'd go out and see if I could help get them back. Because a lot of times it was a real crash and there weren't many of them that lived. And then a rest camp, they decided we didn't have a rest camp for anybody, particularly pilots. And so they sent me out with a group from headquarters to go north near Henyang to find a place that the Chinese had up there, wealthy Chinese. So I went out on that by train to get there, and then one of our vehicles, command car, to go to the place to see it. It was a beautiful place, and I took a lot of pictures of it. I got a lot of them in the books here. And our group decided, yes, this is a good place. It had a river by it, and it had mountains they could climb, had a lake there they could fish and swim in, and this was really a mansion, like one of our Paces Ferry Road, big. It's simple though, see, but it was big. And so anyway, we agreed to that. And